Malcontent News is a team of journalists, activists, and researchers with three key missions. A commitment to show an unfiltered view of the before, during, and after of key events, live, as it happens. To defend the First Amendment using our rights of a free press. And to amplify the voices of underrepresented individuals including Black, Indigenous, persons of color, and the LGBTQIA+ community. Our team is committed to seeking equality for all and holding those in power accountable. The easiest way to support Malcontent News is to bookmark our website at malcontentnews.com, like and follow us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter, TikTok, Twitch, Instagram, and in the Google News app. To provide financial support, you can become a patron, make a one-time donation through Venmo, or link your Twitch account to your Amazon Prime account and use your free subscription to subscribe to Malcontent News. Thank you for supporting independent journalism and for being a malcontent. Good evening, Malcontents. My name is David. I am the Malcontent, and welcome to another episode of Malcontentment Happy Hour. Today is Wednesday, May 12th, 2021. I hope you are doing very well. We have a great show of all in-house content tonight. One of my favorite shows. Jennifer, how are you doing this evening?
I am doing well. I'm a little disturbed that it's almost halfway through 2021 because it feels like it just started yesterday, but here we are, right?
Maybe time is compressing after the longest years of our collective life of 2020.
Yes. Does your shirt say "Ooh, David"?
It says "Ew, David." Yes.
Interesting.
Are you judging me?
A little bit. I'm wearing a shirt from like a death metal band, so we're all good.
Jennifer, there was some crazy pictures on social media yesterday and today of panicked people in the southeastern United States doing crazy things with gasoline and diesel fuel.
Yeah, no, people were seriously getting a little like excited, almost like toilet paper level excited about gasoline. So I was a little bit concerned, but I know you have some information on that.
Yeah, we have an article that's up on our website, which is malcontentnews.com. I'll go ahead and pop that URL up there so you can read more about it. We're not going to go too much in it tonight, but it won't take you long on Twitter or TikTok to find videos of people pouring gasoline at gas stations into trash cans, storage bins, buckets, and in one case, literally a person putting, I really thought this was fake, but I saw the video of the person filling a trash bag.
Yes. Like, what is
First
going
of all,
on?
it's like illegal, and the people at the gas station are supposed to, hey, you can't do that. But nobody did that. And Jennifer, the craziest part of all, it was all for nothing. The Colonial Pipeline is open as of 5 o'clock Eastern time today.
I know.
Basically, everyone's predicting that the fuel supply will normalize in the southeastern United States by the weekend, meaning the end of the weekend. And only 7% of gas stations reported that they actually ran out of gas.
Yeah, people again were getting like TP level excited about the potential gasoline shortage. And I'm glad to hear the Colonial Pipeline is back on track because that was a little insane to be filling bags with gasoline.
All I can think of is the Cheech and Chong movie Nice Dreams, where they had the 55-gallon drum of the gasoline in the van. And he's like, can't be blazing up in here with all those fumes, man. Oh, it'll be good. So
Yeah.
I'm sure that some of the fire departments down there are just watching some of those videos and are like, "Tell me you want to burn your house down without saying you want to burn your house down."
Yeah. Yeah. That's very
Jennifer, I understand you've got something not as like fun. We love you, Florida, even though we at you all the time because you're just such an entertaining state. But Jennifer, you don't have necessarily a fun little Florida story for us.
No, I do not. This is actually Florida, David. This is Tacoma.
Yeah. Go ahead and I in Jennifer's defense, she got show notes about 8 minutes ago.
Yeah. Maybe 8 minutes ago. So actually, yeah, this is a Tacoma stabbing for asking a store like owner and manager asking someone to wear a mask. Jin Huon, 33, a store owner in Tacoma, was stabbed in front of multiple witnesses after asking a man to wear a mask in his store. His father was also stabbed multiple times, trying to protect his son. According to witnesses, the assailant walked out like nothing happened. You just stabbed two men and you're going to walk out of the store like it's no big deal. Both are back home. Zhuan is back at his store. The white suspect, of course, has yet to be identified. And please don't believe this was a bias crime, but an attack over asking someone to wear a mask.
You're not the same. I'm an American. You're a sick asshole.
Yes, we are. Mhm. Yeah. Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah. No, and when I originally read the notes, I totally expected to hear that this was going to be a crime again against perpetrated by a white person against somebody who's considered Asian. So, mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Oof, I know there's just so much. I feel like we should just all go back to phase one because there was less gun violence when everybody was on lockdown. Something, you know?
And you know what? I've
What?
been probably muted like this whole freaking time. This show is just a train wreck tonight.
I know my framing is like crazy. We just got show notes done. You've been muted. Like, can we just
This is
drop
what I get for holding these in my left freaking hand.
the shit show, David? It's a Wednesday. Oh, yeah.
In about 4 weeks, this isn't going to happen ever again because we could blame someone else.
Yes.
I
Thankfully.
don't even know at what point I was muted here.
Yeah. So,
So
yeah, in 4
pretty
weeks,
much all of it.
good.
That's fan flippin' tastic. Hey, good evening, everybody. Jennifer, I think we could let's just go through this intro really, really quick. The
Okay.
Colonial Pipeline is reopened. People were stupid for panic buying gasoline, and gasoline's going to be available in the southeastern United States like it was all normal by Monday. That's mine. Jennifer, they all heard you about the Tacoma. What I had to say about the Tacoma thing is, look, I'm not an abolitionist. You know, I'm a defund the police, but stabbing someone and stabbing somebody multiple times is a crime of rage. This is indicative of a person that is extremely dangerous. And if you know something, and you won't hear me say this too often, but if you know something, let's get this person in Tacoma off the street. And then the last thing I had to say is, also in Pierce County, there must be something in the water, because in Spanaway, a man shot at a sheriff deputy, Pierce County sheriff deputy down there, barricaded himself in a minivan. They found the man dead. There is no word if the man was dead, because if the sheriff officer returned fire or not. There's a huge police presence, and that's all we know. Jennifer, did I just sum up like the last 9 minutes and 30 seconds?
Yes, I think we should head to the land acknowledgement.
We're just going to go to land acknowledgement and just pretend the first 9 minutes of the show didn't happen. It's all going to be good after this.
Okay. Malcontent News comes to you from Seattle, Washington, the occupied lands of Coast Salish peoples. We are grateful to live and work as guests on these lands, the land which touches the shared waters of all tribes and bands within the Duwamish, Suquamish, Tulalip, and Muckleshoot nations. This land acknowledgement is but one small gesture in the ongoing process of working toward repairing and sustaining relations with Coast Salish lands, water, peoples, and their other than human kin.
Thank you so much for that, Jennifer. This is the part of the show where I like to go ahead and tell people that we want you to go ahead and spam those hearts. Spam your hearts, particularly if you're on Facebook and Twitter, because you can spam hearts there. Mess with the Facebook and Twitter algorithms. Make people think there's actually content worth watching over here. If you're not feeling very spammy on the hearts, you can always give us a like. We take likes too. When you spam those hearts, our mods, admins, editors all know that you appreciate it. If you're watching us on Twitch or YouTube and going, I can't spam hearts, you can just do a big long line of hearts if you want. If you're on Twitch, you can use Yoda forever in our hearts. Or if you really want to upset Josh, if the soup can is available, I don't even know if the soup can, do those soup cans, because man, there's some streamer, Josh, he was really upset about the soup can emote. So if you want to trigger Josh, go crazy on the soup can emote. If you're on YouTube, you could just do love you mods, love you admins, love you Jennifer, love you David, but for the love of God, not in a creepy way. Jennifer, are we ready to get the real show started?
Let's get it started.
So Jennifer, last night we were in Bellevue. Franklin Graham was in town having his police appreciation dinner. We've covered that story. Real quick summary of that, like the 30 seconds of it. Franklin Graham invited the Seattle Police Department to a police appreciation dinner. It was going to be on the 11th and 12th. A police officer in the Seattle Police Department complained publicly to the Seattle Times and to the Seattle City Council. Lorena Gonzalez, Seattle City Council president, said, "What the heck?" Acting Chief Diaz said, "Yeah, we're not doing this." Franklin Graham and his association said, okay, we're just going to make this a police appreciation dinner for anybody. They also then backed off from 2 nights, 11th, 12th, to just 1 night. Word then kind of settled down, and then as word bubbled out about it again, 4 different groups said, hey, we're going to protest this. And this kind of culminated with the Bellevue police issuing a series of tweets over the weekend. Protests were small. There was sustained protests, Jennifer, from about 2 p.m. to 10 p.m. We were there from about 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. There were 4 different groups. There were 2 LGBTQIA support groups who were there protesting against Franklin Graham and his positions in LGBTQIA. That included Capitol Hill Pride. There was an anti-fascist protest, and then there were alt-right protesters, including Turning Point USA, the Proud Boys, and Tim Eyman was hanging out with them.
Oh, TPUSA. They just never get old.
So there were no arrests. Now, I know some people are going to go, yes, there was. You're covering stuff up. No, there wasn't. There was a 32-year-old from Linwood, Jennifer, that was arrested for third-degree assault earlier in the day. But according to Megan Black of the Bellevue Police Department, this was in no way related to the protest. Didn't happen in the protest area. Don't know why this individual assaulted a bike cop, but it's a 32-year-old man from Linwood. They were arrested and booked into King County Jail. Jennifer, we have some sights and sounds from last night.
Oh, goody.
You don't even know who belongs to what. You just make stuff up and put it on your website. You like pull out of like a lottery or something, I think, dude. It's like, I think this guy's a Proud Boy this week.
What about you guys?
Will not promote property destruction for minors. Please be safe. Please be silent. We're here to protect the safe, peaceful expression of First Amendment rights, no matter what your beliefs. We are here to prevent violence and property destruction. That allows us to determine the time, place, and manner where you can express your First Amendment rights. This is the police officer's lawful orders. Police officers have the lawful authority to direct the time, place, and manner in order to prevent violence and property destruction between political groups. Here this is safe distance, but we're having to close this intersection to traffic because of the event.
You are the most vulnerable, people in our society. Women, moms, 80%.
Like hide and seek.
What is it now? What time is it? Yeah, see what they say. They're all here.
The Bellevue Police Department. On the way now. Stay safe. Be on the sidewalk. Stay out of the roadway. Your safety.
For those, to give you kind of what happened in the last hour, there is a group of people aligned with Antifa. That group is just to my left and a couple people behind. There are some people over here with Back the Blue. Soup for my family. I know that when my family is hungry, we enjoy nothing more than the American dish, as American as you could get, as Campbell's chicken noodle soup. And what we like to have with our chicken noodle soup is tuna fish sandwiches, and specifically bumblebee tuna. Yes, bumblebee tuna, the most aerodynamic tuna money can buy. I was reading the comments, Jennifer.
Okay, yeah, I was gonna say, don't forget to mention how aerodynamic Bumblebee tuna is, but you got it.
Bumblebee
So.
tuna, the most aerodynamic tuna money could buy. Just ask former social media icon Donald Trump. We have no idea on the attendance in Graham's dinner, but there wasn't a throng of people. We were in the lobby at the Hyatt. Most arriving were wearing no masks. We saw one individual. We don't know if they were associated with the dinner or not. They were asked to put on a mask. They completely refused and walked away. We did see some acts of overt racism. There were white power symbols being flashed. This is going to offend some people. One person telling a woman, "Get out of my way. My dog doesn't like," we'll call this a homophobic slur. One person yelled "white power" out as they drove by the group of Blue Lives Matter protesters. And chants of "back the yellow" were directed at the combination Bellevue, Mercer Island, Redmond, and Seattle Police Department from at least one person who associated with the Proud Boys. As we learned on January 6th, "back the yellow" was a chant that they used during the insurrection. We mentioned earlier, Jennifer, Franklin Graham canceled the dinner that was supposed to happen that night. He will be in North Carolina tomorrow morning. I hope he can find gas for his rental car for an appreciation breakfast for police out there. But you know what, Jennifer, that jumped out at me last night?
What?
No Matthew.
Oh, what?
No, I would have bet a body part that Matthew would have been there, and I would be losing a body part today.
Yeah, no, I am very, very surprised that Matthew did not make an appearance.
I don't want to put the kibosh on it and say something. I'm a little worried because he didn't show up to this one, but he didn't show up to this one. So anyway, nice people you hang out with there at Tim. We did reach out to Bellevue City leadership. We also reached out to the Hyatt. They didn't respond to our request for comment. Bellevue City leadership and police were not as reactionary as they were in October. There wasn't panic boarding up of buildings. There was no emergency declaration. And again, no arrests.
Well, it's quieter than what we anticipated, which is always a good thing, but it's too bad that there were those, incidences of homophobia and other things that occurred, but it definitely could have been much worse.
It could have been much worse across the board. And I mean, at the end, it was pretty chill. At times, to be frank, it was kind of boring. There's an interesting picture we have in the photo gallery of our website where there is a bike officer from Seattle Police Department, CRG, and they just look totally zoned out.
Yes, I saw that one.
Did I leave the iron on?
Yeah, you were having some fun with that in the chat earlier.
We were. You can go see that on our website. Let me go ahead and flash the URL up for that one more time. Then we're going to do a brief pause for the cause, and we're going to move on to our next article.
Okay.
We're continuing our interviews with 2021 Seattle mayoral candidates, and we have our next interview tonight. And tonight we have Jessen Farrell. Jennifer, I interviewed Jessen earlier this week. Was
Yes.
an excellent interview. Everybody we've interviewed to this point has been excellent. And I think we're just going to go ahead and dive into the first part. 2 parts tonight. You'll be able to comment and chat about what you're hearing as we're going through on the side. So you have that, and we'll be reading your comments, and we'll do a little unpack for each section. We're here with Jessen Farrell, 2021 Seattle mayoral candidate. Jessen, how are you doing this morning?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for joining with us. What I'd like to start a little bit before we get into our questions. What is it that has you running for mayor in 2021 for Seattle?
This is a really hard time for folks, whether it is, the economic disruption from the COVID-19 pandemic, racial injustice. If you're a parent like me, struggles with remote learning and lack of childcare. And I really think that there's this sense that we can be doing so much better as a city, that we're not tackling both the really basic things like basic service delivery, let alone the biggest problems like homelessness and climate change and housing affordability and public safety. I really think that there's this hunger for problem-solving leader who's really willing to articulate a vision, wake up every day and implement that vision. And I am hoping to make that case to the city why I am that person.
Seattle is facing an ongoing crisis related to unhomed peoples. Washington State experienced a 6.2 increase in homelessness in 2019-2020. King County spends over $1 billion a year between public and private investment to support approximately 12,500 unhomed people with disappointing results. If you were elected as mayor, how would you address this crisis? And how do you think your plan provides aid in resolving this crisis, both in a short term and in a long term?
Okay, well, I think there are really 3 parts to that question. Number 1, what is the plan? Number 2, why I'm the person that can get it done. And number 3, what we need to be doing above and beyond that. So I'm going to kind of take each of those things in turn. And the broad context is we've been in a homelessness crisis now for many years, and our leaders have not really acted like that's the case, waking up with a sense of purpose and determination and holding ourselves accountable to really helping people get inside and get the services that they need. So I, like many Seattleites and people across the region, are just really disappointed in the lack of progress that we've made. Now, the good news is I actually think there's quite a bit of consensus around what it is that we need to do. We need to be creating more interim housing options. In COVID, we have learned that using hotels as a safe and stable place for people to come inside is really effective. We also know that we need to massively scale up access to mental and behavioral health services that people need. We have an opioid crisis in the state. We have a really strong state opioid prevention plan. We need to be partnering with the state to be delivering on that. And then finally, of course, not only are we needing to invest in the interim solutions, but we need to be such as interim housing like hotels and tiny homes and the behavioral health services. But we actually need to be scaling up our access to affordable housing generally. There is absolutely a crisis across the region, and that's something we need to be solving for. My background is as an advocate on transit and transportation. I'm a former state legislator, and I've really delivered on those big regional solutions. And to get in front of the homelessness crisis, we're going to have to stop patting ourselves on the back for incrementalism and really relentlessly focus on those particular solutions that are scaled to helping people get inside.
How does your plan differ, and how does this get us to the long term?
Well, the interesting thing is I actually think there's a lot of consensus. And if you look across the candidates' plans, particularly on those interim solutions, there is a lot of consensus. But I'm going to make the case that there are really two core differences for me. Number one, part of my plan includes massively scaling up affordable housing. I'm calling it ST3 for housing, and it takes its basis from the way we've really been able to scale up regional transit infrastructure. We have a regional approach. We're working together across 3 counties. We have a very significant public investment that is tied to a plan. And we're using, multimodal strategies to get people around. Similarly, in housing, we need to be scaling up housing at all income levels, very low income, all the way up through middle class housing, and at a variety of life cycle needs. If you're a family, you have a different need than if you're aging in place or if you're a younger person. And finally, every single neighborhood across the region needs to be taking on its share of affordable housing. So that's a core difference. And then, of course, the second core difference is, again, one of experience. I'm the candidate in this race that has accomplished large-scale regional and state solutions to our problems. I mentioned working on sound transit and advocating for transit, but that also includes having helped negotiate paid family leave and delivered the 2015 transportation package. So it's that combination of being able to deliver both the consensus solutions, filling in the gaps, and then having the experience to do it.
As a result of the ongoing COVID pandemic, economic recovery and development and addressing Seattle's crumbling transit infrastructure, which you hinted on in your previous answer, such as the West Seattle Bridge and the Magnolia Bridge, are of great importance. Additionally, some are expressing concerns that the jobs that left downtown Seattle specifically are permanent and that workers are not going to return. So this is a 3-part question. Part 1, how do you plan on tackling the infrastructure issue, of which it sounds like you're passionate about? How will you stimulate economic recovery and development as we move beyond COVID? And then the third part, what concern do you have about employers and workers not returning to Seattle?
All right, that's a lot of great questions. And I think what it really recognizes is how important infrastructure is as a tool to spurring economic recovery. And I was the chair of the governor's task force on safe work and economic recovery. And one of our core recommendations was that we need to be making major investments in infrastructure, both the safety fix it first projects like saving our bridges and fixing potholes, but also really saving public transit. In a big, dense city, we need to make sure that people have options to get around, and for those folks who are transit dependent, continue to have that agency and freedom that transit really brings. So that's a really important piece. And I would say that there are really 3 core strategies that we need to be employing to be able to continue to fund transit and move it into the next generation of really excellent service, and then also fixing our bridges. The great news is that the state is still considering a transportation investment package, and the city has to be advocating for including our bridges and transit infrastructure in that. Secondly, the Biden administration is also considering a significant infrastructure plan. That matters. And then third, we have our own local tools, and we need to be stepping up and being a partner in funding and furthering our own infrastructure. And I would say that it has to be tethered to our core values, though, around equity, making sure that those parts of the city that have historically been left out, particularly those communities of color, have the first set of investments that matters. Secondly, climate change. Transportation is a really significant driver of climate change, so we need to be lowering emissions from transportation. And then again, this idea of freedom and agency. Transportation should be a way to help you get to where you need to go. And our most vulnerable users, our youngest, our oldest, folks with disabilities, we really need to be centering their needs. So that's a little bit about my transportation agenda. There's a lot more on my website. And then, as to that second question, I think it was around downtown and what we're going to do around downtown. Our city is so strong because we have a fantastic downtown and we have great neighborhoods, and we need to be investing in both. And obviously, there are a lot of concerns about the state of downtown right now. And one of the core things that we need to be doing over the long run, they're both short-term and long-run things that we need to be doing. We've done a great job bringing jobs downtown. And of course, now there's some question around what's going to happen in COVID, after the pandemic. But we really need to be being aggressive about continuing to build housing downtown. If you have a family like mine, there aren't a lot of options for you to be able to live downtown. We need to treat downtown like the great neighborhood that it is. And so that means really aligning the housing strategies with the job strategies. And that way you're able to have people downtown shopping and participating in commerce, et cetera. But that also then means you need that complete community aspect. You need schools, you need open space. Those are all longer term things. In the very near term, of course, people are worried about public safety. They're worried about, actually getting people downtown again. They're worried about our jobs going to be coming back. And that is something that we absolutely need to be focusing on. I think one of the things we can be doing is, be a tourist in your own community as a way of getting people back downtown. Downtown is open. And part of it is just that, kind of reculturating ourselves and changing our habits again to being downtown for those of us who don't live downtown and don't go downtown every day again. But obviously, public homelessness and public safety are real concerns, and those need to be addressed immediately as well. I'm not going to go into the details again around homelessness because I did before, but that is something that we absolutely have to address. It is a crisis. It is a humanitarian crisis, and we just haven't been acting like it. And that's something that has really impacted downtown in particular.
As a result of protests related to the murder of George Floyd, police violence, and ongoing racial inequality, Seattle has earned a reputation as crime-ridden, dirty, and unsafe. At one point, the city was labeled an anarchist jurisdiction by the previous presidential administration. Do you agree with that view? What do you think is going to shift perceptions? And how do you address racial inequality that exists in Seattle?
Well, I want to just start by pushing back really hard on the Trump administration. They obviously had a strong political interest in, demeaning cities for a whole host of reasons. So I just want to dismiss that out of hand. But, I will say that there is this sense, I think, across the city that we want to be a city that we're proud of. And how do we turn anger into action? And particularly around public safety. And I just want to talk a little bit about what I see as our city's core values around that, because that should guide our conversations and therefore our strategies and budgets around public safety. So first of all, every single person in our city, especially our Black and Brown community members, should feel safe as they go about their day-to-day lives. And, for people like Charlene Lyles, who was murdered by the police 4 years ago in 2017, she was calling for help. She was in a crisis. So that is a situation and an instance where our public safety failed because it was not creating safety for folks. Likewise, another value that is really important is that public safety has to mean so much more than just a traditional policing response. It has to mean all of those social and economic and cultural supports that create thriving communities. And those ideas need to really drive our discussions around budgets and what public safety means. And so just to do if I could give a couple of specific examples then of what I mean by that, because the details matter here. Our values and articulating our values matter, but the details matter too. So our crisis response system absolutely needs to be changed. There should not be a case where if you are in the midst of a mental or behavioral health issue, you could get harmed or killed by the police. That is absolutely something that we need to change. And there are actually a lot of strategies that are being employed on the ground in Seattle, whether it's Health One that is through the fire department or community-based crisis response systems relying on caseworkers. We need to scale those up. Another specific example where we can do better around public safety is by really changing the way we do transportation and enforcement. Too often, there is a disparate enforcement of traffic laws, whether you're fare enforcement, crossing the street, riding a bike. And we know that there are actually ways to remove an officer from actually the policing piece. You can do all kinds of things to slow traffic down on streets, whether it's use of cameras or creating bulb outs and more street trees. There are lots of ways to promote better safety around transportation that we should be looking at. But there are things that are working that we need to also keep. For example, our regional domestic violence unit and the way they have been working to take guns away from dangerous people. That matters. Implementing our ERPO, our Extreme Risk Protection Order law, that's really important. The detective work that happens around things like theft of catalytic converters. Those are things that we need to continue to invest in. So it has to be tethered, though, to values first, and then strategies and budgets need to follow.
Jennifer, that's the first half.
Yeah. She had some, I think, solid and at least thorough responses for addressing issues related to homelessness. You and I were talking in the chat during the interview about, you really liking that she referenced downtown and her response as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I liked when she talked about the downtown situation is downtown in Seattle is becoming an empty core from a housing standpoint. South Lake Union doesn't have a lot of housing. There's nothing that kind of happened even pre-COVID, like 7 p.m. It was kind of empty down there. And we've seen in other cities like Houston and in Los Angeles, when they have these empty core downtowns, it creates problems. And so I don't know how you implement it, but I know that I am a big advocate and a big believer that if people work where they live or work within proximity of where they live, they're more invested in those neighborhoods.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an excellent point that she made. And again, I really appreciate how prepared she was so far for the interview and to give thorough responses thus far.
The other one that I liked was anger into action. And the thing that jumped out at me, Jennifer, when she said that, it was framed in a way that I feel that Jessen was trying to address the community at large. She was not speaking to her voting bloc, but trying to speak to a larger block of people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's a very smart move at this particular moment in time. We have a large field of mayoral candidates, and being able to distinguish yourself in that way, I think is very smart on her behalf.
We're going to do a little brief pause for the cause, and then we're going to run part 2.
Black Coffee is a hub for communities and a hub for meeting people, making friends, and understanding.
What Black Coffee is to me is a place to actually call home, a place where Black youth will feel welcomed, where Black families will come and feel like they're at home.
What we're trying to build is more than just coffee. Community is something that we do naturally. We know who's in the community, we know what the deficits are, and we're trying to fix that. We want to bring people together.
My hope is that the phrase grounded in excellence shows up everywhere and that it becomes a movement.
I'm looking forward to hanging out at Black Coffee with my friends and feeling safe.
Black Coffee to me means opportunity for people like me and my other friends and family to come here and do homework safely and hang out and stuff like that.
That is happening. It is happening.
Black Coffee Northwest is located in Shoreline, Washington. You get off at Highway 176, which is the 175th exit. I know that's a little confusing. 176, 175. Head south on Highway 99 just a little bit. They're on the west side of the highway. They have amazing coffee, amazing merch, and they have, as you probably have already seen in the comments, especially if you're new to the show, going, what is a potato scone? They have potato scones. They're the best thing you have ever had in your life if you're into scones. It is like the best, fluffiest scone you ever had in your life. And a baked potato and cheese and onion had a baby, and that's what you're eating. It's just absolutely amazing. I always tell people, check their website for their hours because their hours shift every now and then. And wow, we lost Jennifer. It's the David Show at the moment. And with that said, seeing how it's the David Show, I am just going to go ahead and roll. The technical gods are not being kind to us tonight. Curse you, technical gods! We will roll the second part of Jessen's interview. On the subject of, you've dovetailed on a lot of things that we're going to dive deeper into. Compared to the West Coast cities of Portland, San Francisco, San Jose, Sacramento, Oakland, and San Diego, Seattle has the second highest cost per officer, tied with Oakland, and the second highest officer per capita behind San Francisco. Additionally, the average officer makes $150,000 a year before benefits, according to a study done in the Seattle Times and also Forbes. Seattle police say that they are suffering from slow response times and claims that they need additional budget. The police budget was cut approximately 18%, and staffing levels were adjusted to roughly 1,325 officers if fully staffed. They're at 1,088 today. How would you define defund the police, and what is your position on defund? And how, as mayor, do you restore community trust in the Seattle Police Department?
So again, this answer has to be driven by what our values are. And I just, articulated them, which is to say that every single person should feel safe as they go about their day-to-day lives, and that public safety is so much more than just a traditional police response. It's those cultural, economic, and social supports that create thriving communities. And fundamentally, our budgets and therefore staffing levels have to reflect those values and the strategies that actually work. And I laid out a bunch of those strategies in my previous answer, so I won't go through them again, but it is just to say that you can't lead the conversation with staffing levels, because in a vacuum, you don't get the results that you want around actual public safety. You have to start with values and the strategies that we know work.
What is your position on defund the police? One of the protester demands in 2020 was defund by 50%. Again, budget was cut by 18%. What is your position, and how do you define defund?
Yeah, so my position is that our public safety system fundamentally needs to be transformed, particularly in those places that are causing deep harm. Our crisis response is an example. Transportation enforcement is another example. The way we treat substance abuse is another example. Those are all things that need deep transformation. And so my position is that if we are able to transform based on our values, if we are able to build budgets and staffing levels based on our values, there will be things that we are scaling up, but there will be things that we are absolutely scaling down. So that is how I would approach this conversation, so that we actually get to outcomes where every single person, particularly our Black and Brown neighbors, feel safe in this community.
One of many things that COVID has shed light on and that you have alluded to is the ongoing mental health crisis that is facing us as a nation. And Seattle is not exempt from this. Recently, a man in the throes of a mental health crisis was fatally wounded by the Seattle Police Department near the Seattle waterfront. Some cities have implemented programs where unarmed teams and social workers respond to mental health calls. And in Seattle, we've rolled out Health One. We're adding a second unit currently, and a third unit, I believe, is proposed. What would you do as mayor to further address the ongoing mental health crisis? And I'm going to add a little bit to that question. The increasing opioid deaths that we are currently seeing in headlines over the last, say, 60 days.
On people experiencing mental health crises, particularly on the street or in their homes and calling for help, we need to be doing those things that we know work. I mentioned Charlena Lyles. She had actually called for help 17 times prior to her being shot and killed by the police. So that is a system that is not working. And we actually do know that there are programs, and you mentioned them, professionals, they are caseworkers, they are social workers who are building relationships with people over time so that they're able to meet their medical and healthcare needs, as well as help them get to services. That is absolutely something we should be doing, and we know that works. For example, Health One is an example, but there are other programs, Just Cares. So we need to be scaling those programs up because they get people connected to the services and the housing they need, and they are typically a safer response, a less fatal or harmful response. So that's really important. On the opioid crisis, we have a comprehensive state opioid response plan, and the city needs to be a much more proactive partner in implementing that plan. And there are a lot of components. There are upstream components, working with doctors around prescriptions using non-medical pain management approaches, working to make sure that people have safe storage, training physicians to be and medical professionals to be able to assess whether there is an early stage opioid addiction happening, so that help can be remedied or can be provided. So there are a bunch of upstream things that we need to be partnering with our medical and care community to be implementing that are part of our state's plan. And then related to, again, what happens when people are in the throes of addiction, we need to be creating pathways so that people can get the kinds of supports they need, particularly medical opioid use disruptors. There are treatments like Suboxone that require daily administration. So we need to be scaling up our public health infrastructure so that people have access to that, so that they can get to a place where they're able to, have reduced cravings, where they're able to have that interruption of the addiction cycle that we know is necessary for people to really get to a better place. So the public health infrastructure matters. And then, of course, the final piece is that stable housing, because you can't get in front of an addiction if you don't have a stable place to go every night.
On this subject of stable housing affordability is a significant problem in Seattle. 88% of Seattle's land for housing is zoned for single-family units. Over the last 5 years, most of the new construction has been centered on the 12% that supports high-density housing. Developers and builders focused on small footprint properties with minimal parking and luxury appointments. Do you support changing zoning rules for ADUs and more dense construction? That was part one. This is part two. What changes to Seattle regulations for the construction of residential property would you support?
So the affordability crisis is a real consequence of many decades and in part centuries of systemic racism that have really left out particularly our Black neighbors and wealth accumulation that comes from housing, but also trickle-down economics, where we have not adequately regulated and taken away, in fact, regulations that created housing stability in the last couple of decades. So we actually need to take a comprehensive approach. Zoning is one piece of that, and I very much support changing and reforming our zoning so that every neighborhood has access to diversity of housing types that meet people at different income levels and meet people at various stages of their life cycle. Again, if you want to age in place and live in the neighborhood you've lived in for a long time, you may not have opportunities. And so really changing the kinds of the housing diversity within a neighborhood matters. But there are a lot of things that we need to be doing beyond just zoning, because zoning changes in and of itself doesn't create stable communities necessarily or affordable housing in the way we want it to. We need to be looking at those financing mechanisms that run behind or through a building. You may be familiar with a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. That's a great housing product if you're lucky enough to have it, and it creates a lot of stability for a homeowner. We need to be thinking about what is that next generation of stability supports for both owners, people getting into homeowning, and current renters. Those things all really matter, and that's a conversation that's beyond zoning. Finally, obviously, the way we do permitting, that has to be streamlined. It takes way too long in this city. We know that we can reform permitting to achieve both our ability to deliver more housing, our environmental goals. You don't need to pit those two things against each other, such as tree canopy and more affordable housing. Those are things that absolutely can be sorted out. And I know this. I helped negotiate a permit streamlining bill at the state level that had broad support of both the environmental community and the development community. So these are things that we can absolutely do. And we just need to be focused. And again, that's why I'm proposing ST3 for housing, because what gets planned for at least has a chance of getting done.
Seattle has a reputation for having high taxes compared to other Washington cities. A number of initiatives have added incremental taxes to fund transit, homeless programs, education, and the general fund. These taxes are small on paper. For instance, STBD Prop 1 added 1/2 of 1 cent to the city's sales tax. However, most of these taxes are regressive due to Washington state's existing tax structure. Will you pledge no new taxes for the residents of Seattle? And what programs would you cut?
No new tax pledges are the language of trickle-down proponents, which I do not believe in any way. But I will say this is how I approach a tax conversation. First of all, it should be driven by what services do we want to fund. This is a city that cares about high quality services, and this is a city that wants to fund those things. So when we are talking about taxes, we are merely talking about the mechanism that allows us to, through government, provide the things that we want, whether it's transit or childcare or environmental programs or parks. Those are things that people want, and we have to start by start the conversation so that it's really tied to what it is that we're trying to do. Secondly, we do have, now it may be the number 2 most regressive tax system thanks to action that the state took. So the city now needs to be working as a partner to have access to more tools that are fundamentally progressive and focused on expecting the very wealthiest to be paying their fair share. As you mentioned, the very wealthiest pay only 3% of their overall income into taxes, and for the very lowest income, it's 17%. So the city needs to be a partner in really aggressively changing that. And so that is something that is a value of mine that also animates my opinion around taxes.
What programs would you cut if you were mayor?
That is a question that you have to be looking at in that broad sense of what is it that we are actually trying to do. And, if you are talking about transit, if you are talking about parks programming, if you are talking about funding for homelessness services, I think the broad point is that we are not doing enough. Now, there are things that we need to be looking at, and I named a few, particularly in the public safety conversation. We can be looking at a lot of different ways to do better traffic outcomes, safer traffic outcomes without the use of officers. So that's a place where we need to be looking at as a place to cut. Again, also the idea around crisis response and who we're asking to go at a time of crisis. That's something that we can look at changing. So there are things that we can be doing to change how we're spending money in the city, but it absolutely has to be tied with what are our objectives, what makes a great livable city. And as mayor, I will say, I have been a legislator. I have worked at the executive level in government before, and every single expenditure matters. And you have to go through every single line item with a fine-tooth comb, because that is really about delivering services for the city. So I will commit to delivering budgets that have that attention to detail and are really focused on delivering the things that we want in this city.
Justin, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it. I know our viewers have appreciated hearing about your platform and your vision for Seattle for 2021 and beyond. We wish you luck in your campaign, and I'm sure we'll be talking again in the future.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me.
Jennifer, welcome back.
Hi, I'm back.
Were you picking up some aerodynamic tuna?
Yes, that is exactly what I was doing. I was getting together some soup for my family, some
vegan
tuna.
soup. I know this isn't vegan soup, but you were picking up vegan soup for your family.
Yes.
Jennifer, this is the 4th or 5th one that we've aired. Yeah. And looking over at the comments, this is probably some of the strongest comments that I have seen of the mayoral interviews that we've done.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's legitimate reasons why. I wasn't able to see the comments mostly because I was trying to keep the volume down, and it's off like timing wise with the actual what's on my computer screen. But I know there was some serious dancing around the defund issue. I'm sorry, my allergies are so bad right now. There was some serious dancing around the defund issue, and I think part of our job is to be objective in the context of what these people say in their interview and our feelings about candidates. But I can't help, as you and I were kind of discussing in the chat, that there's a lot being said, but not a whole lot of substance to what is being said, I think is a fair assessment.
It definitely was, it felt more talking points-ish than the previous interviews that we have done. Certainly very articulate. There are definitely things that are said that I know that I would latch on to and go, ooh, I really like that. Something absolutely. That I will say that I really like was talked about our pretext stops, right? These, this person's got a burnout headlight. But it's not about the flipping burnout headlight. It's about, can I find something else, right? It's a fishing expedition. Exactly. And something that she had talked about was ending these pretext stops. And I'm all on board for that. The other one that people were commenting on also was the issue on taxes and what programs would cut, and it was very similar thing. There were the feels that are being expressed from the people who watched the interview there wasn't a clear answer provided on that.
No, exactly. Again, we're just back to like, and I think that's kind of very common in political speak is to just say a lot, but keep it very superficial and not because you're pandering to a particular audience at this point. You're trying to grab people from multiple political leanings, and so trying to craft the best response for that. I think perhaps we were a little bit spoiled with our first interview, which was very candid and it was very clear the kind of position. The first couple interviews, the kind of positions these candidates had. Now you're starting to see people as the field grows become more, how can I word these responses in a way that is going to be broadly appealing, and what does that look like? And I think this is what we're seeing with this interview.
If for people at home, if you're keeping score, the only candidate so far that was like, I support defunding the police, 50% was Andrew Grant Houston. That's the only mayoral candidate we've talked to.
Yes.
The only candidate that said there's no candidate that has said no new taxes at any degree, and we'll put that out there also. Jennifer, the other thing I will say is that as we move through these, people that start coming to at the end of the pile, they have a disadvantage, but they have an advantage. People are starting to gel what their thoughts are as you get closer to the election. That's the disadvantage. The advantage they have is that their team or their people can look at the prior interviews and do their homework and go, I'm going to go here, I'm going to go there, I'm not going to go there. And so they can craft their answers a little bit more for the audience.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too, during recording, it's interesting to see how different people set up and how they're prepared for these interviews. For example, when we interviewed Lorena Gonzalez, her campaign manager was there as well. So it's very interesting to see how involved the campaigns are in their interviews and how they're interested in using them to convey particular portions of their platform. But you're right, people that are coming later are at this, disadvantage and an advantage at the same time because they can see how the previous candidates have interviewed and kind of build their responses accordingly. But again, I think we're back to, especially with the, recent issues with Jenny Durkan and her texts and her declining popularity, which, quite frankly, I didn't
Understatement.
know was possible. You're starting to see people kind of like shift their platforms and then start to really think about how they can craft responses that are going to grab from large swaths of different political leanings.
Yeah, there were some comments in the comments also, another thing where people were going, I would like to see this question asked, I'd like to see that question asked. To just re-explain, I didn't do this preamble for this interview because we've had a lot of technical issues tonight. We're just trying to get through the show. We are asking the same 7 questions in this first round of all of the candidates. That is in the interest of being fair and giving each candidate an opportunity to express their platform. The questions were crafted by our editorial board, in part looking at things that are of key interest to the people of Seattle, and that is what guided those questions. There have been other questions that people have asked to be introduced. And what our plan is, as we get closer to the primary date, and I know people were asking that, and we'll get into that. Jennifer, I kid you not, this night could not get worse. I just knocked my speaker notes across the flipping floor. All right. So with that, I have no notes. I'm just rolling now. So we will be asking further questions. Primary date is August 3rd. That is when you will get to vote on what appears going to be a very crowded primary ticket. The top 2 candidates will advance. We are a top 2 candidate, regardless of party. Those the 2 will be on the final ballot. In theory, a candidate could run a write-in campaign, and something that we have communicated to everybody that we are talking to, if somebody were to run a write-in campaign and that campaign appeared viable, they will continue to have a seat at the table, metaphorically speaking, as we go to the first Tuesday in November. If it appears that we have those 2, we will be reaching out more to those 2. After we finish this first round, we are going to be asking harder questions of the candidates because we can look at some of their positions, do cross and compare. And we've also told them as things start to happen in the city where we're going to be looking for their opinion or feedback, we'll be working with their teams to get it. But we do want to operate in a place where we are fair.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to put it candidly, like I'm a historian. So when you do historical research, you start with a large set of broad questions. And then as you start to get further into your research and start to find out more things, you start to narrow your questions and ask more specific questions that are going to get at the crux of your argument. So it's a very similar process in interviewing these candidates. You have to start with a very broad set of questions and then get these kinds of responses to learn what kind of questions you're going to ask next to get different kinds of responses and more in-depth responses from candidates.
We'd like to thank Jessin Farrell and her people for coming on to our show. We are honored that we have a voice at the table and that a seat at the table, and that we can provide a voice for them and thus provide a voice to our audience. Jennifer, we're falling a little behind, but that's not on it's on us, but it's not on us. And with that, we're going to do a little pause for the cause, and then we're going to move on to our final segment. Hi, Malcontents. I'm David, the Malcontent, and I'd like to talk to you for a moment about supporting independent media. When you support us, you help us bring the before, during, and after. You help us defend the First Amendment. You help us amplify BIPOC and LGBTQIA voices, and you help us hold leaderships at a local, state, and federal level accountable. None of this would be possible without support by viewers just like you. When you become a patron for as little as $5 a month, you help buy technology, safety equipment, and help cover travel expenses so that we can continue to bring you news that you trust. If you can't become a patron, you can do a one-time donation on Venmo, and your dollars will go to the exact same causes. With your continued support, we can continue to amplify BIPOC and LGBTQIA voices while showing the truth on what is happening in the world around us. Once again, thank you.
So we have a lot going on the COVID front today, and so we're going to do kind of a run through and an update. I'm going to keep it as brief as possible with as much information as possible because of technical difficulties. We're a little behind this evening, and it's been a little bit of a mess. My apologies. Just hang in there with us for like 4 more weeks, and we will be in studio together, and it will be less technically difficult. So we have some new numbers in the context of COVID, and I know you have some slides prepared for that for me, David. So why don't we go ahead and hit that, and we'll talk about the numbers by county, and then I'm going to talk about the UW and what they came through today and a few other things. So here are the numbers for King County. Statistically speaking, King County should be returning to phase 2. They're slightly down with 240.3 cases per 100,000. We have a 5.8 positivity rate, which is up, 87.6% of ICU utilization, which is also up, and then 12.4% of patients in ICU with COVID, which is slightly down. Moving on to Snohomish County, they should also be in phase 2. They're at 223.2 cases per 100,000, which is slightly down, a 7.8 positivity rate, which is up, 69.5% ICU utilization, which is actually markedly improved from the last count, 18.4% in ICU with COVID, which is slightly down, but it's worth noting that acute care patients increased more than I want to say that number is wrong. It says 2%, but I think it's actually like 12 or 21% within the
more than 20%. Actually, it's gone up more than 20% in 5 days.
Thank you. So yeah, and 20% within the last 72 hours. Moving on to Pierce County. Pierce County should actually be back in phase 1. They are at 364.9 cases per 100,000. And even though that's static, there's an increased positivity rate, which is of 13.4%, which is indicative of under-testing and widespread community transmission. Wear a mask, people. 88.6 ICU utilization, which is both way up and bad. We have 17.1% ICU, which are COVID cases, and that is slightly down. And then 12.1% of all acute care patients are COVID. Statistically, 20% of those will move to the ICU. Statewide, we have 762 lives, and 75 of those are on ventilators. Moving on from Pfizer, they have approved vaccines for 12 to 15-year-olds. David, we're still kind of on. So Pfizer's approved vaccines for 12 to 15, which is great. Kids that are under 16 and 12 or older, you can get them vaccinated for COVID. I am frozen on my screen. This night has been a nightmare. I am so sorry. In addition to the numbers that we've just gone through and the addition of Pfizer vaccines for those between ages of 12 and 15, the University of Washington, of which I'm going to try to remain objective because I am technically an employee and graduate student, held a town hall today talking about their returning to just basically normal for fall quarter, which is particularly interesting considering that, you know, we've not quite cleared the hurdle for COVID yet. So they plan on having completely in-person classes. There will be some hybrid for professors who choose to record classes and disseminate them and make them available for students. They discussed student visas for international students and some of the limitations on that and what they plan to do to support students as they return. They also talked about, you know, again, having football games, the usual social events. The problem many people have found, however, is that they're giving an out to people who choose not to based on philosophical reasons. And that is not something that can be deployed by, say, Seattle University or even WSU. So a lot of people are a little bit concerned. Again, my apologies, my allergies are terrible. A lot of people are really concerned about, you know, how many are actually going to use this philosophical excuse for getting out of having the COVID vaccines. From personal experience, when I got accepted into the University of Washington, I had to have a titer test done to make sure that my measles immunity was up to par. And it wasn't, so I had to get an additional measles vaccine, and there was no exception to this. So it's interesting to me that we're making these kinds of exceptions in the context of COVID vaccines. Additionally, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say when we were filming Namibia and we were out there, I was actually exposed to measles in the Katatura slums, and that was one of these moments. It's like, you know, oh, why is he dressed? Oh, he was supposed to school today. Oh, so why isn't he in school? Oh, he's sick. Oh, you're not feeling well. No, I have measles.
Oh gosh. Wow.
Just like as a matter of fact, like that. I'm like, oh, great. Hope my vaccine's working.
So yeah, I think it's really, there are a lot of people that are really concerned about that. Given how large Washington is and how many people tend to congregate on campus at any given time. So we'll have to see how that plays out. The record is not a student and not somebody who works there. I'm going to say that it feels a little bit like pandering to parents to ensure that they send their students and the corresponding tuition money to the university, because we've had a lot of budget issues as of COVID. So I'm curious to see if they're going to be able to follow through with the promises that they've made.
Yeah, we will.
more
We will
interesting
see
news.
what happens there, and you will keep us up to date, I am sure.
Of course, of course. But we have more interesting news out of Bellingham. You're having a little bit of a baby.
Say again?
You're having a little bit of a baby boom in Bellingham, at a Bellingham hospital.
Yes, I know. 18
Yeah.
babies, what, in like 36 hours or something crazy like that?
Right. Yeah, so this is at Peace Health in Bellingham, and they've actually had to postpone elective surgeries because they're experiencing this baby boom. 18 babies in 36 hours. And so they're like at capacity. And they're like, this is a once in a lifetime. Spokespeople from the hospital said this is a once in a lifetime thing. We've never actually seen this happen before. So yeah, and they have like 10% of their beds are filled with COVID patients. And so until they can get decrease their capacity, they're, basically putting the kibosh on elective surgeries for the time being.
Yeah, it's not all because of COVID, but 10% COVID in acute care is bad. That actually, depending on what their positivity numbers are, would put them at phase 1. That is not a phase 2 number. When you get to 10%, you're at phase 1. So those numbers aren't good. Jennifer, I saw that story. They said it has been the busiest, like the busiest 2 days in the history of that hospital.
Yes, and it's so funny to me because everybody was talking about like, oh, there's going to be so many people having babies because people are stuck at home together during COVID. Well, there you go. There's your proof. You did not. You did not break out the 70s porn music.
Okay, so worthless trivia. Your worthless trivia. Jennifer, did you know this? You remember the Muppets?
Yes.
Do you know where that song comes from?
Where?
It comes from a Swedish porn film, My Mouth to God.
Wow.
As little kids, we were indoctrinated to Swedish porn music.
Do you know which Sesame Street Muppet I identify the most with? You want to know? Do you want to know?
Okay. No. Yes. Spill.
It's Oscar the Grouch. Do you know why?
Why?
Because if you look at my dating history, you can tell that I have a love affair with trash.
Ah!
Some of my exes are great. I love you guys, but
while I was away.
Whew, I made some poor choices, people.
You can tell the show's been a shit show tonight because we're getting punchy.
Absolutely.
Jennifer, I think you have one more COVID story for us.
I do. If you live in Ohio, you may be the recipient of $1 million, but only if you've had your first vaccine or more. So actually, this begins May 26th. And what they're doing is they're giving away $1 million via this lottery for those who have had at least one vaccination. Yeah, over the course of 5 weeks. So yeah, if you are in Ohio and you've had one vaccination starting May 26th, make sure you get your name in because you could have $1 million.
Hallelujah! Holy shit! Where's the Tylenol?
Carmen!
I mean, Carmen got $1 million and he bought a amusement park with his $1 million. What would Eric Cartman do? $1 million for the vaccine?
And some Kentucky
and he can buy
Fried
his
Chicken.
amusement park back.
Oh man, David, the show has been a mess.
The show has totally been a mess.
I'm so sorry, guys.
We're so We are trained professionals, let me tell you. I certainly hope this was much better than the virtual event that my company's running next week. Real confidence builder if they're watching.
No, you want me to join
Jennifer,
in on
you
that?
get the closing though, because it'll just be weird if I do it.
Yes. So now I got to find the page, David. Thanks.
Hallelujah!
This is a
Holy
mess.
shit! Where's the
I don't even
Tylenol?
know anymore. Whoa! Oh, got it.
I like ran around to the other side of the studio to grab my speaker notes. So.
Oh, yes, and I actually know what it is, so why I just didn't spit it out and had to look for the notes. Tomorrow morning, David will be on Converge Media Morning Update with Omari and Trey to talk about the racist incident in Mary O&M Javalicious in Kirkland and other stories we are covering. Please don't listen to me right now, except for like that David's going to be on Converge.
Yeah, just so our audience knows, I sent Converge like about 3 other stories. We're going to be talking about the incident of Javalicious, but I also sent over 3 other stories we could potentially talk about in addition to that, and I left it in their hands. So I'm going to figure out what I'm speaking about either later tonight or tomorrow morning. We have more interviews coming up, Jennifer. We have Rodney Holt. That interview's in the can, but it hasn't gone to post. Monday. I think that one's going to air on Monday. We have Bruce Harrell scheduled. We have State Representative and Speaker of the House Lori Jenkins scheduled. We're interviewing her tomorrow. We have City Council candidate Brianna Thomas. She is scheduled on the slate for Friday. And Jennifer, a little housekeeping note: we're not going to have a show on May 20th. I really need a mental health day. To be real blunt and candid, maybe overshare a little bit. I'm going to use a millennial term. I need a mental health day. I really do. I need a mental health day because I need a day. And Jennifer will be the day after her second vax.
Yes.
Hopefully she'll behave better than that. And anybody who has gone through the day after, it's kind of a roll of the dice, but we're just assuming that it's going to be a big fat. So no show on the 20th.
So I feel like we should just chalk this entire show up to we both need a mental health day and call it a wash and come back new tomorrow.
Hey, Rashi, when you go to do post-production on this one, seriously, the only 2 to do post-production, the only segments, do post on the, I cannot believe we're doing like this live, but I know Rashi's watching. Do story number 1, so the story about Bellevue, and do Justin Farrell's interview. Don't worry about any of the rest because it was just a complete train wreck tonight. Jennifer, I'm going to go cry in the corner. You have a great night, and I will see you tomorrow. The good news is we could not possibly screw it up worse tomorrow. We have set the bar low.
Don't make that a challenge.
Good night, everybody.
Night.
Malcontent News is a team of journalists, activists, and researchers with 3 key missions. A commitment to show an unfiltered view of the before, during, and after of key events, live, as it happens. To defend the First Amendment using our rights of a free press. And to amplify the voices of underrepresented individuals including Black, Indigenous, persons of color, and the LGBTQIA+ community. Our team is committed to seeking equality for all and holding those in power accountable. The easiest way to support Malcontent News is to bookmark our website at malcontentnews.com, like and follow us on Facebook, subscribe to us on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter, TikTok, Twitch, Instagram, and in the Google News app. To provide financial support, you can become a patron, make a one-time donation through Venmo, or link your Twitch account to your Amazon Prime account and use your free subscription to subscribe to Malcontent News. Thank you for supporting independent journalism and for being a malcontent.
You fit the profile. You're the malcontent.
Nobody wants to hear the nonsensical ravings of a loudmouth malcontent.
Fuck you! You are the biggest hypocrite on the face of the planet.
I say that you're a terrible reporter. That's what I say.